Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. In this video, I wish to talk a little bit about ideas, and in particular, we're going to be talking about what ideas are fundamentally, on a philosophical level at least, and I'm going to be focusing my message, so to speak, on the idea of inheritance of ideas and why is it important and why is it underestimated in our current, let's say, thinking about ideas. All right, so in various previous videos I've talked about the network, this paradigm of network replacing, let's say, the paradigm of hierarchies, etc., this horizontal sort of organization versus vertical. And I've talked about the networks of ideas in our culture, and essentially what it is, it's a power network, right? So ideas themselves manifest, or rather they represent the manifestations or either verbalized or not, or of certain intents, let's say, of wills to power, fundamentally, again, this Nietzschean concept. And I would claim that the foundation of ideas is irrational, a visceral, if you might say, like something tangible, you know, something vivid and alive, so to speak. So it's will, essentially, the foundation of ideas. It's just expresses itself on a rational level, in a rational manner, to be able to be communicated, right? So this irrational aspect kind of manifests itself in rational way as an idea. This is basically the idea, so to speak. Again, to be able to be communicated. And I remember this famous, or maybe not so famous, quote from the movie Inception, brilliant movie, by the way, by Christopher Nolan, where they say that the idea is the most resilient parasite, right? So this is more or less what I'm talking about, is that it's almost a living being because it comes from a living being with its own value systems, intents, and will, essentially. This is the idea. Well, maybe it's kind of far-fetched, but I hope you understand what I mean. And essentially, I would say that ideas are like the surface, the surface of something unknowable, inherently unknowable, of the irrational, fundamentally. Again, will is irrational, right? Our body is irrational, it has will, which is irrational, etc. So the irrational speaks to us as conscious, rational beings through ideas. So again, the irrational tries to reach out to us and other human beings and the society as a whole through ideas, through some articulated, verbalized patterns, you know, so patterns of control, patterns of whatever, messages, etc. It's all rational, but it comes from the irrational, right? So as I've stated in my video, what was the title? Is our universe a computer simulation? It's my kind of fundamental philosophical position, is that chaos creates order. So this chaos of irrational produces order of an idea to be recognized, so to speak. So there's I would say that chaos creates order in order to be known. And there's a poetic line for you, so you might quote me in some, you know, quasi-psychological publics for, you know, 40-year-old single mothers or something like that. All right, so what was I talking about? So yeah, this irrational aspect is key, it seems to be, at least, though ideas can also produce new ideas. Kind of this rational aspect can spark something else out of it, so to speak. And you might, again, kind of speaking biologically, you might perceive this as a mutation of an idea, or evolution, if you like, or something like that. And that would open up this sort of mutation of an idea, new possible ways of reassembling the network of power, where by network of power I mean either a human being, which is basically a network of power, I mean, of, well, speaking mechanistically, of different organs with different interests, of different instincts, etc., or a whole society as a network, again, of various groups of interests, etc., with their own wills, so to speak. So a new idea, this new mutation, would give voice, so to speak, to a previously unrecognized and silent collective. Again, some new arrangement of whatever was present, you know, it kind of connects the dots, so to speak, and produces a new network and manifests it as a new idea. I mean, and I'm sorry, I kind of might sound too abstract and too philosophical here, or philosophical, but this is the way it is, and hopefully on some very deep intuitive level you understand what I mean. So, and if this new collective kind of bringing this new idea as its banner, so to speak, this new part of the network assembled as a single entity, so to speak, isn't there, then the idea itself cannot be formed, cannot be formulated, cannot be born, so to speak. So unless the collective is there, the idea that unites this collective is not possible, right? So in this sense, you might say that the ideas are actually predetermined in some sense by the social, cultural, economical, political, etc. situation in this society, or for this individual, in which case we can talk about psychological like state of this individual, like their biography, etc., what they've experienced in life, like what kind of movies they saw, what kind of relationships they've had in their family, or with their loved ones, or with their friends, etc. Hopefully you understand that. So all of that, all of this baggage, so to speak, it predetermines what kind of ideas this person can have later, and the same goes for the society. All right. So again, if the collective isn't there, the idea wouldn't be born. And I'm reminded here about the brilliant mechanic of so-called thought cabinet from the game Disco Elysium. So in this game, you can have multiple dialogues with many characters, and in these dialogues you sometimes encounter new ideas. So they spark some ideas in your head, I mean the main character, and the main character then can sort of research these ideas. So he has to think about them for some time, and then after they are researched, they give you some bonuses, etc. And this is a brilliant new mechanic. I mean, for an RPG game, this is it's just genius, I would say. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying that ideas can bring forth new ideas, kind of mutate. So this guy, the main protagonist, with their experience, they encounter something new, and it kind of allows them to engage in this network building in their head, so to speak. So to assemble new collectives, new networks in themselves, so to speak. And that brings forth some power. How do you say it? Well, increase in power, right? So it gives you some bonuses. So you have this additional tool in you, this new network of power inside you, this new idea that helps you somehow, right? And by the way, the game Disco Elysium is just brilliant. It's just like probably the best piece of art that I've experienced in maybe last 2 or 3 years. Like it's really a masterpiece. Like some people say it's like the second Planescape Torment, which is also a masterpiece. And I would agree, like really, it's on the same level. So yeah, so if you enjoy video games, RPGs, quests, like puzzles, then definitely. And it's actually much better than even fiction, you know, fictional writing, because it's much more immersive, etc. And the game is just brilliant, like genius characters, fantastic dialogues, amazingly inventive role-play system, like again this thought cabinet, the way characteristics, your basically parameters work, where they basically, well, okay, anyway, I wouldn't kind of spoil it for you. And it's like, it's very sarcastic and ironic and self-ironic, and it's very funny. Like I laughed my ass off a couple of times in this game, and like, but this bubble of irony and fun and comedy is immersed in almost infinite ocean of tragedy and sadness, and it's so cool. Like again, I've cried my eyes out like a bitch a couple of times there. So it's just a brilliant game, like seriously. All right, so returning to the topic. So the physical, we have even the physical manifestation of this metaphor of network that I was talking about, which is obviously the brain, right? So in brain, we more or less understand by now that what happens when you have a new idea is basically, or when you learn something, let's say, you have a new connection between various neurons. So roughly speaking, a fresh brain, so to speak, is just a bunch of neurons, and then as it learns stuff, as it encounters stuff and comes up with new stuff of its own, it forms connections between these neurons. So a new idea is always like a spark, like a kind of, I don't know how to explain this, like a snap that connects previously disconnected neurons. So it forms this new network, right? So this is exactly what I'm talking about. So in some sense, well, there's this Bayesian approach to brain as a model of the world, etc. And in this sense, it is what I'm talking about exactly, because again, the world is a network, the society is a network, a human being is a network, and the idea is a network of various wills, various intents connected together into a single entity. And this is what happens in the brain when a new idea emerges or enters the brain, so to speak. When you come up with something new, it just connects these previously disconnected neurons into a new network, and it persists. Now it's a single entity. It's like an army, so to speak, right? An army, like a connection of various people previously disconnected. Like you have a mobilization and you form a battalion or something of these young guys who don't know each other, but now it's a single unit, right? Something like that. Okay, so the key point again, why did I call this video Inheritance of Ideas, is inheritance of ideas, suspiciously, right? And I wish to talk about this a little bit, and I think it is super underestimated currently. And in particular, what I'm talking about is how in literal sense, the ideas are inherited. Like, let's say in families, there have been some studies that have shown that, let's say if your family is like socialist, leftist leaning, then the kids would also be kind of socialist, leftist leaning. If the family is more like conservative, then the kids would also be more or less conservative. And it's not really clear how this works, like whether it is connected to genetics, so it's like the very machinery of the human being, or it's just the upbringing, or it's both, or whatever. Probably it's both, I mean, to some degree, but it's not clear to this day. Anyway, and this psychological Big Five, ocean test, it also shows that it actually kind of persists through generations. So if you are highly open your children would be highly open. If you're highly neurotic, maybe your children would be highly neurotic, etc., something like that. Even though I might add here that obviously in teenage years it's a repetitive pattern that I've talked about in previous videos. I don't exactly remember which ones. That the kids, these teenagers, tend to rebel against their parents and kind of oh, I remember, that was Science and Anarchy. Definitely, I mentioned this in that video. But anyway, so the teenagers tend to rebel against their parents and kind of try to distance themselves from their parents as much as possible. So if their parents are communists, then the teenager kids would try to be more free market, conservative oriented or something like that. So there's this factor also. And I believe that in terms of society and culture, it actually helps us to evolve, because it kind of, well, set a new ground, so to speak. And then when they reach more mature age, these kids, like let's say in their 20s and 30s, they start to reevaluate their own biography, their system of values, etc., and come up with something new. So it would be this Hegelian, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, something like that. So it seems like a very powerful instrument. Like in your childhood, you kind of adore your parents. Well, at least if your family is more or less healthy, let's say, then in your teenage years you kind of rebel against your parents. So this is antithesis. And when you mature more, you kind of try to synthesize both, right? So you recognize that your parents weren't actually that stupid. They kind of had their point. And at the same time, you cannot really discard your own youthful, rebellious spirits, but you have to kind of reconcile the two, right? So you create something new out of the two. So yeah, it seems to be a good sort of evolutionary pathway for ideas, at the very least, and development of your brain and development of society following from that. All right, so there's definitely an inheritance of ideas in families, but at the same time, I would say that there is an inheritance of ideas in culture in general. So sometimes, damn that corona. So what I'm talking about is that most of our ideas that we can come up with are not really our own. In the sense that their source comes from some other person. So we just read some books, we watch the movies, we, I don't know, talk to other people, and we are impacted by their ideas, like whatever ideas are contained in this medium that we are immersed in. And so it's really hard to come up with a, like, completely new idea, let's say. So I would claim that more than 90% of what you claim are your ideas, or rather your views, or whatever, your values, were invented or by somebody else, or at least somebody else have come up with the same concepts, ideas, and values before you, right? So you're not the first one, you're not a pioneer here in this sense. And I can say that about myself too. Like, I can clearly see the networks of power, the networks of ideological influence on myself. Like, I am this network, basically, of various things that I've experienced in culture. Like, let's say my philosophical views are basically the same as views of Friedrich Nietzsche, of whom I've talked about many times. And like, when I was reading him, I thought, like, when I first read him, I was actually like, I felt indignation, like I was pissed off, basically. But at the same time, like, on some, because I was like 16-year-old idealist, you know, and Nietzsche kind of destroys idealism, so to speak. But anyway, at some level I felt that this is correct. Like, this is why I'm so pissed off, because it is actually correct. And he just, you know, like brings a mirror and shows me myself, and I'm just pissed off at myself, essentially. But when I was reading him later, when I was more or less drifting into Nietzscheanity, I was like constantly baffled at how similar, like how, well, again, on some intuitive level, how much I like his work and how much it looks like almost written by myself. Like, I almost felt as a reincarnation of Nietzsche, so to speak. So, yeah. And to a degree, I still feel this way, but not so much anymore. But anyway, again, that was my youth, pretty much. All right, and it's actually interesting that Nietzsche himself had similar experience, at least I believe so, because he was a fan of Schopenhauer, Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher, not a philosopher, but philosopher. And Nietzsche has an aphorism that goes something like, I'm just kind of paraphrasing that, if nature didn't give you a good parent, a good father in particular, then you should find one on your own. And I'm absolutely certain that he talked about Schopenhauer. Like, this is, I believe that if I was in Nietzsche's shoes, I would write this about Schopenhauer, basically. So he is your real father, so to speak. So you kind of believe that he is an authority, a much better authority than your own father in your family. And so this is what I'm talking about, that in culture we can find our true parents, so to speak, right? In terms of ideas, at least. So, yeah. Even though later, again, Nietzsche kind of rebelled against his father, so he criticized Schopenhauer quite heavily. So, yeah, I'm probably not mature enough to criticize Nietzsche, and frankly, I don't even know how you can criticize him. He was just a genius, like, really. But yeah, indeed, I'm not really mature enough, probably, to do that, as you can hear from what I'm saying. But anyway, so yeah, there's definitely a lot of influences on me personally, like Nietzsche, Bruno Latour, radical constructivists. Those are the main people who influenced my philosophical or philosophical thinking. And again, in terms of music, you can talk about Robert Fripp and King Crimson and Frank Zappa, my favorite composer, etc. And there's a lot of other, obviously, other influences. Even, again, returning to the question of rebellion against your family, even negative influences are still influences. They're like something that you wish to distance yourself from, but you only do that, so that's a certain positive action, if you like, this distancing. But this distancing is only produced, so to speak, is only enacted because you've experienced this negative influence. Like, let's say, the things you hate definitely impact you not to a lesser degree than the things that you love, basically. This is what I'm saying. And this is also, it also leads to ideas. Like, when you criticize something, it might spark new ideas in yourself. It might help you. It shows you where you shouldn't be going to. So it shows you, basically, it cuts off some of the pathways that you would prefer to ignore, and therefore it kind of brings you to more likable pathways, right? Paths of your life or whatever, your personal development, etc. Okay, so and to conclude this rant, I wish to reiterate one thing that I've talked about in one of the first videos on this channel, although I don't remember which one. There I've discussed quantization of ideas, and I just wish to bring it forth again, just to kind of finish the picture, so to speak. So I believe that, again, Since ideas form networks, and ideas themselves are networks of power, essentially, what it means is that there is a finite number of ideas that are possible, right? Because a network might be very large, and the number of combinations of the elements might be almost infinite, and the connections between the elements, etc. See graph theory, etc. in mathematics. But still, it's finite. So what it means is that the number of ideas would also be finite. And what it also means is that, well, there is no continuum of ideas, if you know what I mean. So you would, in transitioning between one idea and a neighboring one, let's say, you make this sort of quantum jump, so to speak, quantum leap. So it means that two neighboring ideas, like, well, a person might like snap from one to the other only through this mysterious quantum leap of like thinking. This brings forth, well, again, as I've called it, quantization of ideas. So this brings forth, I believe, this is the reason, in my thinking, of phenomena like Mandela effect, where, again, to repeat what it is, it's like some people believe that Mandela wasn't released from prison, didn't receive the Nobel Prize, but he actually died in prison, and this was called Mandela effect. And there are many more examples of that. You can search them. But I believe that it's exactly this fractal but finite structure of networks of ideas that brings forth these phenomena, like Mandela effect and some others. Although, okay, there was another thing that I wanted to mention, but I kind of forgot, is that in rhetorical sense, like, how can you convince someone that their ideas are wrong and yours are right? And again, following from, and I'm kind of, again, repeating myself from the video comment about comments. So there I talked about the convincing others, etc., and discussion in the comment sections, etc. So my point there was that you can't really convince other person. Like, the best you can do is to articulate your views and kind of drop them into this person so that they would digest them for some time, and at least they would acknowledge the existence of this point of view, which you have hopefully articulated well enough for them to consider seriously at some later stage. So my point was that, yeah, people can change their minds. People can go from one idea to the other with given some time. And why do I say that? It's because, again, in order to adopt a new idea, you have to have this new collective of interests formed in you before that, before you adopt the idea, before this connection of neurons happen, etc., etc. This new network of interests in you connects and kind of forms itself. So, yeah, so you basically need this person to change before they can adopt your idea. So until they would change into this other person, so to speak, which this new idea that you are presenting them to, damn, that was a super long sentence. I cannot finish it. So they need to become a new person before they can adopt your new idea, basically, new to them. That's what I'm saying. So yeah, so you cannot do that in a comment section in a span of 1 hour. This is just impossible. Either they already have these networks formed in them, or not. But if they had, they probably would already acknowledged your idea and adopted it. So most likely they don't. So the best you can do, again, in a discussion is present your idea as articulate and like neutral-minded as possible, not aggressive, because aggression brings forth defensive measures. So they would kind of, as a hedgehog, spike away, and you wouldn't be able to approach them. They would just throw your idea out. So you just have to be very neutral and very kind of calm and respectful, and maybe even sort of, how would you say it, disinterested even, right? So you have to provoke some interest. You just basically state your idea, like, this is what I have on my plate. If you want it, you can take it. If you don't, well, go ahead and don't do it. And then maybe in like a few years, this person's situation would change, their relationships to other people would change, etc. And they may remember that they have this sort of seed of that you've planted in their head, and it would start growing into this new idea. And these new collectives of interests and power that were produced by these few years of experience would adopt this new idea, and a person would change their mind. Well, hopefully it made some sense to you, right? Although I can't really tell. Anyway, thank you for watching. The eons are closing.